Hello, this is Idź Pod Prąd TV, Go Against the Tide from Poland. I am Unika Chojecka, this is Pastor Paweł Chojecki.
Hello.
And we have our American correspondent, Alex Newman from the New American magazine and John Birch Society. Hello.
Hello, how are you guys?
We are fine, and I hope you're fine. And we first question from us. It's about American North Korean summit in Hanoi, Vietnam. And what do you think about the President Donald Trump broke the negotiations with Kim Jong-un? Is it good or not?
I think it is. In fact, I thought all along that trying to negotiate with a mass-murdering communist dictator was an exercise in futility. Maybe it'll go well. And, you know, I think Donald Trump had the best of intentions. He wanted to try to be a peacemaker and remove this kind of chess piece that the global communist movement has, which is, of course, connected to the broader international movement to build a world government. And so if Donald Trump had succeeded on that, I think it would have been very good. But ultimately, dealing with communist dictatorships is very often futile. They make all kinds of promises and then they don't deliver. They're always looking for ways to stab you in the back. And this has been going on with America for many, many decades. You know, the Soviets and the U.S. government would agree to something. The U.S. government would obey the agreement and the Soviets would continue doing whatever they wanted to. So, I think the outcome is fine. I think Trump did the right thing. You don't want to look like you're bowing to the demands of some mass-murdering tin pot dictator. So I think it went well, and I'm frankly quite happy that he walked away. So.
Why did he do that? Why Donald Trump broke the negotiations?
Well, at least what they're saying in the media right now is that Kim Jong-un wasn't willing to denuclearize until all of the sanctions were lifted, and Donald Trump wasn't willing to lift all of the sanctions until there was actually some very concrete progress. And apparently they couldn't come to an agreement. And Donald Trump is a very good and a very firm negotiator, and he walks away from the table. And it may be part of a negotiating strategy, and it may be, fine. You don't want the deal that we're offering, then we leave. So I think either way it worked out fine, but I think the big conflict was that Kim Jong-un wasn't willing to do enough concrete action to make it worthwhile to lift these sanctions. So.
Do you think that this situation will change the negotiation with Chinese communists?
That's a good question. I've always seen the Kim Jong-un regime as kind of a puppet of the communist Chinese government. And I think the communist Chinese see it that way as well. And I think the North Korean regime sees that as well. We actually did a cover story in the New American about a year ago about North Korea. And what we found is that, first of all, you have top generals of the Chinese military bragging that they're basically inseparable from the North Korean regime. One of them compared the situation to the dogs and the lips and the teeth on a dog, right? They're this close to each other. They're inseparable. They're part of the same organism. And I think that's a good way to understand it. So I think the communist Chinese regime was pretending to play along with Trump and, we support what you're doing. We don't want nuclear weapons on the Korean Peninsula. But ultimately, I think this was all just a big fraud. And I think it's important to mention, too, the role of the United Nations in building up the North Korean government. Actually, we caught them some years ago building a factory for microchips in North Korea. The UN, I think it was the development program or one of these UN agencies. And then Kim Jong-un was using these microchips to use in his missiles and in his submarines and in his ships and all the rest of it. So I think the North Korean regime, the way it's portrayed in the media is just this kind of pariah that nobody wants to deal with. But in reality, it's very, very closely connected to China. And of course, it's very connected to the broader globalist establishment that helped put it there and that I think wants to deliberately build it up and use it as a kind of a threat, as a way of motivating people to do things that it wants to accomplish. And so I think it's very dangerous. I think it would have been fantastic if Trump could have taken that piece off the board. But unfortunately, I don't think that's going to happen. As for what the Chinese do now, I think the Chinese now are going to have to go back to what they were doing. So.
Change our focus to United States. What are the news from the wall? Is it ready or not?
Not quite yet, unfortunately. Yeah. Trump has announced that he declared an emergency. I think we discussed a little bit about that last week. Now there's opposition building, a lot of opposition. The U.S. House of Representatives has passed a resolution disapproving of this wall. Of course, the House of Representatives is controlled by the Democrat Party that wants open borders, that wants unlimited mass illegal immigration, because they want to change the electoral system and fundamentally transform America. So they are, of course, very opposed. And we have a number of Democratic states, the Democrat Party-controlled states, that have also sued. And they actually sued in the Ninth Circuit, which is by far our most liberal court. Our federal court system is divided up into circuits, and the Ninth Circuit happens to be the most liberal, the most progressive, the most anti-American, anti-constitutional branch. If this gets up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court obeys the text of the law, I think it's very clear that Donald Trump has the authority to do this. In fact, the federal laws say that the president has the authority to build barriers to stop drug trafficking, to stop human trafficking, and all the rest of it. If it happens to stop illegal immigrants on the way, hey, maybe it's an added bonus, right? But the law is very clear that he has this authority. So, there is a lot of opposition building. It's not clear right now whether the Senate will support this House measure. It's possible because there are plenty of Republicans in the Republican Party who are actually, we call them rhinos. Maybe that's, Polish people probably don't hear that term often, but it stands for Republicans in name only. So really, they are kind of Democrats masquerading as Republicans. And we have a lot of those, unfortunately, in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. So there is a chance that they could pass this resolution through the Senate as well. Of course, it will be vetoed by Donald Trump, so that's that's not actually going to stop it. But the court challenge, I think, is the real risk to the wall. And in the meantime, the president is going ahead and working on some things. Apparently he's rebuilding parts of the wall near the San Diego area, which is where a lot of illegal immigrants cross. It's a very highly populated area. So some things are happening, obviously not as quick as Trump and many of his supporters would like, but it is progress. And even though the Democrats are trying to stop it, it is still moving. So.
We have a similar problem with so-called rhinos in our parliament and in our government, so we know the matter. Let's stay in the States. Do you know there are some reactions in the USA for the Israeli-Polish conflict after the Warsaw Summit?
I don't think Americans, by and large, really follow international politics that much. I know the U.S. government is now working with Israel on some sort of alleged peace plan. I'm very concerned about the role that Jared Kushner is playing here. But as for American involvement in Israeli-Polish relations, I don't know of much going on that front, although that doesn't mean that nothing's happening. But, big things are getting ready to happen right now. Israel has elections coming up, and Netanyahu is having to bring in, when the media calls them far right, typically we know we're dealing with, more moderate conservative parties. And so that's encouraging to see. And hopefully Israel will have a conservative, a right-wing government that'll be easier for the Polish government to deal with and easier for the American government to deal with, rather than a left-wing government that would try to seize power. So.
Have you a sign that some pastors said something about this treaty, this new treaty between United States and Israel, and this plan?
About the peace plan, the Trump peace plan?
Well, I've been hearing a lot of concerns. There's a lot of concern that land would be taken from Israel and given to this alleged Palestinian state. And, even the whole idea, I have many friends in Israel. I've spent some time there. Last time I was there, I had an opportunity to interview on record the deputy speaker of the Knesset, of the Israeli parliament. And, I encourage people to go read the interview. His name was Moshe Feiglin, and he was part of the Likud party at that time, and he broke off and created his own now, which is a little bit more conservative, a little bit more liberty-minding, and very anti-globalist. And he made very good points about this. Why are we creating yet another Arab state called the Palestinian state? It just doesn't make any sense. There are already many Arab states. They already created a two-state solution. You have a state there called Jordan. And this perpetuation of this, creation of a Palestinian nation, it doesn't really make sense. The Palestinian nation is not actually a nation. It's just a group of Arabs who started calling themselves Palestinian. But the Arab nation is a real nation. It is an identifiable people with a culture, with a religion, with defining characteristics. And so I think there's a lot of concern that Israel is going to end up getting the short end of the stick here. And there's especially a lot of concern involving Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law, who I think there's a lot of suspicion on him, and rightfully so. I think his political views, his economic views, his views on international affairs are much more aligned with kind of the liberal, globalist New York establishment than they are with President Trump and his agenda and his supporters. So we'll have to see what comes out of this, but I know there are already concerns being expressed in Israel and in the United States, and I suspect those will get louder as time goes on.
You said that Americans are not interested a lot in the international politics, but how would you encourage Americans to signing our petition to President Donald Trump for assisting Poland in obtaining war reparation from Germany and Russia, because it's very important matter for us? How can you encourage American people to help us?
Yeah, it is true. It's unfortunate, I think, that Americans care so little about what happens in other parts of the world. I think it's partly because America is just so big and so insulated. We kind of think that we can exist without the rest of the world and just ignore the rest of the world. At least the American people do, by and large. Maybe not so much the federal government. But I think Americans do need to pay more attention to what goes on outside of America, and I think Americans do need to be concerned, especially with the fate of other freedom-loving nations. Nations like Poland, nations like Hungary, nations like Israel. I think we do need to be concerned with what happens there, and I think to get Americans to be concerned about something, you really have to show them either that it's a good cause or that it has some relation on America. And I think what you guys are doing is a very good cause. And so I think that's one way to approach it. Just explain that Poland is the most pro-American country in Europe. I think you guys told me last time we saw it was something like 80% of Poles have a positive opinion of America, which is off the charts compared to a lot of other European countries. And so, I think that's important to make it known that the Polish people support America, and I think the American people can reciprocate. And, if this is a matter important to Poles, and I know that it is, then, hopefully the American people will get concerned and involved.
In Poland, there is obvious that Germany now has a conspiracy with Russia to rebuild the pact Stalin-Hitler, but I'm interested in the American conscience about that. Do you have some articles or politicians who said that Germany are now against the free world?
I think that's the case. And unfortunately, nobody's willing to talk about that. But, we see that more and more. Actually, Angela Merkel gave a speech at the World Economic Forum, and I highlighted this in one of my articles, where she actually openly said, hey, we're going to deliberately make ourselves more dependent on Russian energy. We're going to shut down our own coal power. We're going to shut down our own nuclear power. We're going to move toward becoming more dependent on natural gas that comes from Russia. And she explicitly said Russia. Why any country in the world would want to make itself more dependent on the gangster regime ruling Russia beats me. Especially under the guise of solving a non-existent problem, this man-made global warming. It's absolutely ludicrous. And so I think the only logical conclusion is that Angela Merkel has very subversive intentions. Being involved with Putin, who was, former head of what used to be called, the KGB. This is very, very problematic. And I think American policymakers need to understand this as well.
That's why we encourage everybody to sign our petition, our Polish petition to President Donald Trump for assisting Poland in obtaining war reparation from Russia and Germany, because it will be an argument for Donald Trump against Angela Merkel and Vladimir Putin. Reparation for Poland, this is our hashtag, and you can send your photos with this kind of sheets of paper to us on Facebook, on our email, and so on.
About Russia, we would like to, Russia and China, of course, we would like to ask you about Venezuela. There is a very dynamic situation. What is your comment on what is going on in this country?
Yeah, it's very sad to see what's happening. And actually, just yesterday, I posted an article on my own website at libertysentinel.org. We pointed out in 2012 that it was the United Nations that helped the dictatorship of Hugo Chavez to disarm the population of Venezuela. And we warned, I hate to say I told you so, but we warned in 2012 what happens when you disarm the law-abiding citizenry. Well, it makes it easier for communist and socialist dictators to oppress the citizenry. They can just start killing and torturing, and nobody can do anything about it. And unfortunately, that's what it has come to. You now have this brutal dictatorship slaughtering people who oppose it. They set an aid shipment on fire the other day. This is absolutely grotesque, and it was made possible by the dictators club that is the United Nations that helped Venezuela disarm the public. So Venezuela is a crisis situation. You have starvation. You have people dying. You have them arresting even socialist reporters from America now. Donald Trump stepped in and saved this Jorge Ramos. He's a very left-wing Spanish-language journalist here in America, and he was arrested in Venezuela for pointing out to the dictator that children are now eating food out of trash cans and things in the country. So it's very sad what's happening. I don't know that there's going to be a happy ending, but I do feel confident that the Maduro regime is going to fall. The question is, what's going to replace it? We talked a little bit on this program a few weeks ago. Even the opposition in Venezuela is socialist, right? Juan Guaido, the guy who's serving as the interim president while they dismantle the regime and call elections, is actually a socialist. His party is a member of the Socialist International, which is the world's largest alliance of Marxist, socialist, and communist parties. Very powerful. They've admitted that they want a world government, a world socialist government. So replacing a socialist dictator with another socialist doesn't strike me as the best thing. But on the positive side, he's saying he's going to serve as an interim president while they organize elections. And there is a possibility that a party that does support liberty could end up coming out of that election very well. And so we'll have to see what happens with that. I'm still hoping that the United States does not get involved directly. I think that would discredit the opposition, first of all, because the dictator and all the dictators always say, oh, you're just stooges of the Yankee empire, as Maduro and Chavez used to call the United States. So I think it's problematic to be seen as openly supporting or getting even involved with the military in this foreign conflict. But I think the sanctions are working. Maduro is not able to really sell his oil anymore. Nobody wants to buy that oil. And so I think the regime is on its last legs. Just sit back and watch it happen and hope and pray that liberty will take root in Venezuela and the people can once again go back to leading their lives and living in peace. So.
And we hope so. And the last question about other socialists and communists, Chinese communists. Did you know that Chinese communists imprisoned Uyghurs in Xinjiang region and in concentration camps? And do Americans know about that? In 21st century, there are concentration camps for those people who don't agree with the communist regime in China.
Yeah, we at the New American have covered that extensively. I've written a number of articles, and I've been writing about the Chinese persecution of the Uyghurs going back at least 10 years now. And it's not just the Uyghurs, of course, right? They don't like the Uyghurs because they have a belief in God, and they don't like Christians for the same reason, because they want everybody to worship the state. They want the Communist Party to be the highest authority in everybody's life. The Communist Party is your God, is your father, is your mother, is your protector, is your caregiver. And of course, people who believe in God have no need for a Communist Party to be those things, right? They already have a God. And so what we see is this relentless persecution. And I think it's good to highlight this, because this dictatorship in China, so many people around the world today treat it as if it were just a normal government. It's not a normal government. It's a barbaric, savage, disgusting, gangster, mass murdering operation, and it should be treated as such. And when you look at what they do to our brothers and sisters in the church, they destroy their churches, they arrest their pastors, they harvest the organs from imprisoned Christians and political dissidents and Falun Gong practitioners, and they put Uyghurs in massive concentration camps to re-educate them to love the Communist Party. This is not a normal government. This is not a normal country. But unfortunately, the Chinese model, I think, is kind of what the globalists envision for the New World Order. This very same system of kind of technocratic governance where the state is all-powerful and where you will be regulated and controlled and monitored and surveilled. So it's very problematic. And I think that's one of the reasons why we don't hear much criticism of this in the U.S. media. We're expected to believe that China is just a normal country now, and hey, their system is working great. Look how rich they're getting, right? And so you have our elites that are very, very friendly with China. You have people like David Rockefeller, one of the top globalists. He went to China in the early 1970s, and he wrote in the New York Times that the social experiment under Chairman Mao is the most important and successful in human history. You have people like George Soros, the billionaire lunatic who calls himself a god in public. He said repeatedly for many years that Communist China should own the New World Order in the same way the United States owns the Old Order. He said Communist China has a better functioning government than the United States, and he said this in public multiple times. So unless you think concentration camps and organ harvesting and forced abortions and knocking down churches and persecuting Christians, unless you think that's a better government than the United States, I think we need to have some investigations of China's supporters overseas as well and see if they're complicit in these mass atrocities against people of all different kinds, all different faiths, and it's an abomination. Unfortunately, Americans don't know enough about it, but we're doing what we can at the New American to change that, and I know you guys are too, so thank you for everything you do.
Thank you so much, and that's why we joined the action Me Too Uyghur. We interviewed Murat Hari Uyghur, who parents were in the concentration camp in China, and the interview you will find on our YouTube channel. Thank you so much, Alex Newman. You were very great. Thank you for your comments. Alex Newman from the NewAmerican magazine and John Bear Society was with us here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, and goodbye.